little girl had been missing for 7 years, and on Christmas Eve, a billionaire mother was about to walk past the only person who could lead her home. But she never expected that person to be a former Navy SEAL standing beside a dumpster with his 8-year-old son, holding a torn red mitten that belonged to the daughter she had spent years believing was gone forever. If you believe kindness can find people where money cannot, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel, because stories like this remind our family that hope can survive even when everything else seems lost. Christmas Eve had turned the city into a river of silver decorations, crowded sidewalks, ringing bells, and hurried shoppers carrying brightly wrapped gifts beneath the pale winter sun. At the center of it all stood Celeste Waverly, a billionaire whose name appeared on hospitals, foundations, luxury towers, and business magazines, yet none of that wealth had ever bought her the one thing she wanted most. Her daughter, Marlo, had disappeared 7 years earlier during a family charity event. Marlo had been 6 years old when a moment of confusion became a nightmare. Celeste had looked away for less than a minute while security guards surrounded the entrance, and when she turned back, her daughter was gone. There had been police searches, private investigators, international alerts, rewards large enough to change a stranger's life, and years of photographs distributed across cities. Every lead had eventually collapsed into silence. Some people told Celeste to accept the possibility that Marlo was dead. Others quietly suggested that someone within her wealthy circle had been responsible. Celeste refused to believe either possibility, but 7 years of unanswered questions had slowly changed her. She became colder, more controlling, and increasingly convinced that if she could control everything around her, perhaps she could prevent another person from disappearing. That Christmas Eve, Celeste was standing outside one of her foundation's community centers, preparing to hand out gifts to families affected by poverty. She had come because the board insisted that her presence would attract donations, but she secretly hoped the event might also make her feel something other than the familiar emptiness that had followed her since Marlo vanished. A few yards away, a man in a worn charcoal coat was helping unload donated food. His name was Garrett Vale, a former Navy SEAL who had left military service after years of deployments and returned home determined to raise his young son, Everett, by himself. Garrett did not look like a hero from a magazine. He looked tired. His beard was trimmed unevenly, his boots were old, and his hands carried the scars of a life that had asked too much from them. After leaving the military, he had refused high-paying security jobs because he wanted to be present for Everett. Instead, he worked odd maintenance and delivery jobs while quietly volunteering at shelters and community centers. He had learned that saving people did not always require a battlefield. Sometimes it meant carrying groceries for an elderly stranger or sitting beside a frightened child until they stopped shaking. While Garrett was moving boxes, Everett noticed something near the rear service area of the building. A torn red mitten was lying beside a trash container, half covered by cardboard. The boy picked it up and brought it to his father. Garrett examined it and immediately noticed something unusual. Sewn into the inside was a tiny silver star and the initials MW. He asked Everett where he found it, and the boy pointed toward a narrow service alley behind the building. Garrett's instincts changed instantly. Years in the SEALs had trained him to notice details other people ignored: disturbed snow, footprints, discarded objects, unusual sounds, patterns that did not belong. He walked toward the alley and saw a small cardboard box near the dumpster. Inside were a child's scarf, a broken plastic bracelet, several food wrappers, and a photograph that had been folded so many times the edges were nearly destroyed. Garrett opened the photograph. The little girl in it was smiling beneath a summer tree. She had light brown hair, a small birthmark near her left eyebrow, and the unmistakable silver star bracelet visible around her wrist. Garrett had seen that face before. Not in person, but on the missing child posters that had appeared around the city years ago. He remembered the photograph because Everett had once asked him why a little girl was smiling from so many walls. Garrett slowly turned the picture over and found a handwritten note containing only a name, Marlo. For several seconds, the former SEAL stood completely still. He knew that a mistake could destroy a family already broken by years of uncertainty. But his instincts told him this was not coincidence. He followed the trail beyond the alley and discovered fresh footprints leading toward a nearby public garden. Garrett called the authorities, but he did not leave. He knew that whoever had left those belongings might still be nearby. At the same time, Celeste was preparing to leave the community center when Garrett approached her. He did not know she was the billionaire whose foundation had funded the building. He simply asked her to look at the photograph. The moment Celeste saw it, the world seemed to disappear around her. Her fingers began trembling before she even touched the paper. She recognized the silver star bracelet. She had given it to Marlo on her 6th birthday. The bracelet had been engraved with a tiny message only the two of them knew about. Celeste stared at the photograph, unable to breathe, and for the first time in 7 years, the woman who could negotiate billion-dollar acquisitions without blinking looked like a frightened mother again. Garrett watched her face carefully and understood that whatever happened next would change her life. Celeste demanded to know where he had found the photograph, but Garrett calmly explained that they needed to search carefully and involve authorities before rushing forward. Her instinct was to use her influence, call private investigators, dispatch security teams, and take control. Garrett stopped her. He reminded her that this was no longer a business problem. It was a frightened child's life. For perhaps the first time in years, Celeste encountered someone who did not care about her money, her name, or her power. Garrett cared only about finding the child. They followed the footprints into the public garden, where Christmas decorations had been arranged beneath the winter sun. Garrett noticed tiny shoe prints near a bench and a scrap of red fabric caught on a branch. Then Everett, who had been walking quietly beside his father, noticed a young girl sitting alone near a community feeding station. She looked about 13. Her clothes were worn, her hair was tangled, and she kept one hand tightly wrapped around a small silver star bracelet. Garrett approached slowly, keeping his distance so he would not frighten her. He did not demand answers. He simply sat several feet away and let her decide whether to trust him. The girl watched him suspiciously. Then her eyes moved toward Everett, who quietly placed his own Christmas candy on the bench between them. That small gesture changed something in her expression. Celeste stood behind Garrett, frozen. The girl looked at her. Celeste looked back. For a moment, neither moved. Then the girl touched the birthmark above her eyebrow. Celeste nearly collapsed. It was Marlowe. Not the 6-year-old from the photograph, but the same child hidden beneath 7 years of fear and hardship. Celeste rushed forward, but Garrett gently held out an arm, reminding her without words that Marlowe needed space. Celeste stopped. Tears rolled down her face as she lowered herself to the ground, refusing to use her status as a shield. She did not demand that Marlowe come home. She did not promise expensive gifts. She simply remained there, crying quietly while looking at the daughter she had never stopped searching for. Marlowe eventually revealed that after her disappearance, she had been moved between several temporary homes by people who feared authorities would discover how she had been taken. She had spent years believing her mother had abandoned her. Every time she tried to explain who she was, adults dismissed her memories as confusion. She had recently escaped from a dangerous temporary living arrangement and had been surviving through shelters and community centers. She had found the Christmas event because she remembered that her mother had once told her Christmas should belong to everyone, especially children who had nowhere else to go. Celeste listened to every word without interrupting. The truth hurt more than any business loss she had ever experienced. She realized that while she had spent 7 years searching for Marlowe, she had also spent 7 years building emotional walls so high that if Marlowe had returned sooner, she might not have recognized the mother beneath the billionaire. Garrett helped coordinate with authorities, medical workers, and child protection specialists. His military instincts were useful, but his greatest contribution was not tactical. He understood trauma. He knew that frightened people rarely respond to pressure. They respond to patience. Everett stayed nearby, talking about ordinary things like school, comic books, and the Christmas cookies his father had burned that morning. Slowly, Marlowe began smiling. Hours later, after the necessary authorities confirmed Marlowe's identity through records and testing, Celeste sat beside her daughter beneath a decorated tree at the community center. She finally gave Marlowe the one gift she had carried for 7 years, a small wooden music box that had belonged to her when she was a child. Inside was a photograph of Celeste holding Marlowe as a baby. Marlowe studied the picture for a long time. Celeste did not tell her that everything would instantly become perfect. She knew better. 7 missing years could not be erased by one Christmas miracle. Trust would have to be rebuilt slowly. There would be difficult memories, questions without easy answers, counseling, and moments when Marlowe might be angry or afraid. Celeste was ready for all of it. Garrett watched from across the room as mother and daughter held each other. Celeste eventually approached him and thanked him, but Garrett told her that he had only followed a mitten and trusted what he saw. Celeste looked at him and said that most people would have ignored it. Garrett simply answered that after spending years watching people survive impossible situations, he had learned never to ignore the small signs that someone might need help. Celeste then noticed Everett standing beside his father, holding the same red mitten that had started everything. She realized the miracle had not come from her fortune, her private investigators, or her powerful connections. It had begun with a little boy who noticed something beside a trash bin and a father who cared enough to stop. That afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the community center windows, Celeste made a decision that changed more than her own family. She established a new foundation dedicated to missing children and vulnerable families, but this time she placed Garrett and several former rescue workers on its advisory team. She also promised herself that the organization would never become another monument bearing her name. It would remain anonymous whenever possible, focused entirely on helping families who had no wealth, influence, or powerful connections. Marlowe eventually reached for Celeste's hand. It was a tiny gesture, but to Celeste it felt bigger than every fortune she had ever earned. Garrett smiled as Everett leaned against his shoulder. The former SEAL had spent years believing that coming home meant leaving the battlefield behind. Now he understood that home was not a place. It was the moment someone finally felt safe enough to trust another human being. Before the sun disappeared behind the winter buildings, Celeste, Marlo, Garrett, and Everett stood together outside the community center beneath the Christmas decorations. There were no cameras, no reporters, no business executives, and no speeches. There was only a mother holding her daughter's hand, a father standing beside his son, and 4 people who had discovered that sometimes the greatest miracles arrive disguised as ordinary moments. Marlo had been found beside trash, but she had never been trash. She had simply been a lost child waiting for someone to notice that she mattered. Garrett had found her because he understood something wealth could never teach. When someone is hurting, you do not look away simply because helping them is inconvenient. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. And before we reach the ending, leave a meaningful comment telling us what you believe the greatest lesson of this story is, that kindness can find what money cannot, that forgiveness can rebuild broken relationships, or that hope should never be abandoned, no matter how many years have passed. As Celeste watched Marlo smile at Everett's silly Christmas story, she finally understood that she had spent 7 years searching for her daughter in every possible place except the one place she had forgotten to search, inside her own heart. She had believed being powerful meant controlling every outcome, but Marlo's return taught her that love was not control. Love was patience. Love was forgiveness. Love was staying when things became difficult. And Garrett, the ex-SEAL who had once believed his most important missions were behind him, walked home that afternoon holding his son's hand, unaware that one torn red mitten had not only reunited a mother and daughter but had also reminded an entire community that heroes do not always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear old coats. Sometimes they carry tired children. Sometimes they stop beside a dumpster on Christmas Eve. And sometimes, when everyone else keeps walking, they simply choose to care.